Welcome to the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. I am Julie Joyce. I'm the Curator of Contemporary Art at the museum. And I am going to introduce the person who will introduce our lecture tonight. So I promise I will be brief. But I did want to say a couple very important things. First of all and foremost, SBMA, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, has some very generous supporters. Many of you are here tonight, and many of you donate your time, your money, your art in many different ways, and we are so grateful for your continued support. So we have many donors, some who give financially, and those would be, part of that group would be the museum contemporaries. And they are my support group, the support group for contemporary art at the museum. They're active in many different ways, through from helping us with exhibitions, to acquisitions, to public events such as this. And we are very thankful for their support, their continued support. We're nearing the end of our 2013 season. We're extending it a little bit, and this is one of our last events. And it's a really good one, so I'm so happy that you're here to help participate. Another way that people support us is through donations of art. And the reason I bring this up is because we have a very special situation tonight. Our guest speaker, who is very distinguished as a scholar, he's written many books, very respected in the field, not just Dada, but also other important aspects of art history, including, I just discovered last night, he's a bit of a Leonardo scholar and well-versed in Italian Renaissance art. But he, together along with his wife, Frances M. Naumann, with his wife Marie T. Keller, actually gave us a wonderful set of drawings, and hundreds of drawings actually, and this was a very recent gift. It came in at the end of last year, and we are so grateful to them for their gift, so much so that we decided immediately that we would mount a small exhibition, a selection of drawings from this gift. Of course, there are other things mixed in there, thanks to the brilliance of the curator of the exhibition, who I will introduce. And anyway, I just wanted to take a moment to say how we just can't thank you enough, Frances, you and Marie, for your very generous gift. We're so happy to have you here. And the third thing I'm here to do is to introduce our introducer. And this is Patricia Lee, who actually curated this exhibition. Patricia has been curatorial assistant for contemporary art for almost as long as I've been here. She's been here over 5 years, and she's done an excellent job. This is her second exhibition that she's curated for the museum. You may remember her exhibition last year, Myth and Materiality, Latin American Art from the Permanent Collection, from 1930 to 1990, and that was about a year ago in 2013. She's almost received her PhD. She's almost there, and I'm just grateful for her assistance with this project and her leadership and her vision in organizing the show, which I think is quite beautiful. So Patricia Lee, I will hand this over to you, and you may introduce Frances.
Thank you so much, Julie. I just wanted to start off, before I get into introducing Frances Naumann, our speaker this evening, I did want to say that I had the privilege of hearing Frances speak yesterday to our docents, and I think you are all in for a big treat tonight. If you are a docent and were lucky enough to hear him yesterday, I think you're going to experience a new set of stories tonight. And just hearing him speak, and hopefully you'll experience this tonight, Frances has this unique blend, being a close friend of Beatrice Wood, but also being an excellent scholar. And I think you'll see that blend of this sort of scholarly approach, but also this really deep, intimate knowledge of her work on a very personal level. And that's something that you don't find often, and I think we're really lucky to hear him tonight. So a little bit more about Francis Naumann. He is an independent scholar, curator, and art dealer, specializing in the art of the Dada and Surrealist periods. He's also author of numerous publications, including New York Dada 1915 through 25, which was published in 1994 and is considered the definitive history of the movement, which I can attest to firsthand as I had to study it in my classes for my exams. It is really the sort of major publication for that period of New York Dada. He's also more recently published Marcel Duchamp, The Art of Making Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction in 1999, and most recently, The Recurrent Haunting Ghost, Essays on the Art, Life, and Legacy of Marcel Duchamp, published in 2012. He's also organized several exhibitions as curator of Making Mischief, Dada Invades New York for the Whitney Museum of Art in 1996, and the following year, the exhibition Beatrice Wood, a Centennial Tribute for the American Craft Museum in New York. And this show actually traveled here to Santa Barbara. Many of you might have been around for that exhibition in 1997. That exhibition traveled here and was on view. And it was the year before Beatrice Wood passed away in 1998 at the age of 105. And she actually was able to see the exhibition. And this was coincidentally also the last time that Francis was here to speak as well. So it's sort of a homecoming, hopefully, for him. So please welcome him. A little bit more about how Francis knows Beatrice. He met her at her home in Ojai, California in 1976 when she was 83 years old and he was a young 27-year-old PhD candidate, I believe, at SUNY, is that correct? CUNY, right? They remained close friends for the next 22 years until her passing in 1998 at the age of 105. In 2001, he opened an art gallery in New York City, where, among other things, he continues to show the work of Beatrice Wood. To mark the 10th anniversary of the gallery, he organized the exhibition Beatrice Wood, Drawings, Vessels, and Figurative Ceramic Sculpture. So please join me in welcoming this evening Francis Naumann.
That could be the longest introduction I've ever had. I think when you get older, it just keeps getting longer. And luckily, it stops at a certain point when you stop. Anyway, I'm happy to be here. As she said, I was on this very stage 14 years ago when I gave a talk about Beatrice. And I also, before I even say anything, I need to apologize to the docents who might be here because I am going to repeat some of the stories. I have to. But also I may have forgotten if I told the story yesterday. So I'm hoping you suffer from the same short-term memory loss that I have. The other thing is that if people attended a lecture that I gave in Santa Monica 3 years ago, I've actually changed some of the slides, but I'll end up saying some of the same things. It's inevitable, I suppose, over time, and you keep speaking on the same subject. Anyway, I can begin right away with that mention of Beatrice and how I actually met her. It started in 1976 when I was preparing research for my dissertation, which was declared, at least at the time, to be New York Dada. I never actually submitted that as my dissertation in the end. I wrote about Man Ray, but then went back and wrote about New York Dada, which ended up being the book. But my first encounter with the name Beatrice Wood was when I saw that photograph that you see on the left. It was reproduced in the book by Robert Lebel on Marcel Duchamp. And I was very interested in anything that had to do with Duchamp. And even before I describe this picture, I should give you a little background there. I first, I was interested in becoming an artist in high school because I could draw an apple that looked like an apple and figured it was easier than science. So I applied to go to art school, and it was while I was in high school that I found a book on Marcel Duchamp, which when I opened it came as a total shock because it had a bicycle and they were calling it a work of art. And the reason I loved that one particular object, it was the late 60s, the Vietnam War was raging, I did nothing but fight with my mother, and I knew she would never understand that bicycle as a work of art. And that meant I found something she couldn't understand. In fact, she never understood it. And in fact, the more I thought about it, I realized most people wouldn't understand it. Because another one of the artifacts was a urinal. And I know that you can interview, let's say, 99% of the people in Iowa, and they're not going to tell you that's a work of art, no matter where it's reproduced. So for me, it was critical, everything that Duchamp did. He was sort of my, you could almost say a kind of god, because I worshipped everything he had produced. But when I went to college in 1968, I went to a performance that actually featured a stage set by Marcel Duchamp. I had seen it on a poster, so I went to the performance. It was a Mears Cunningham dance performance, and I was bored to death in it. I can confess, because I didn't know anything about modern dance. I saw the Duchamp sets in the background, and it was an auditorium about twice the size of this one. I sat in the back, and I got up and left early, to my greatest regret ever, because Duchamp was seated in front of me. This was the summer of 1968. He got up on the stage at the end, and my professor, my photography professor, took pictures of him. And I missed him. He died 3 months later, and I never met him. So I regretted so much and by the way, I tell everyone this, and it's true, I will watch the worst movie you ever could put in front of me, and I will watch it to the end, because something good could still come. So I've punished myself for my entire life for that one big lapse. Anyway, so I wasn't going to let something like that happen to me again. When I saw that photograph, and then I learned that she was still living, I thought, well, I've got to go out and find this woman. And I knew that she didn't live in New York. I had seen this work on the right, a work by Duchamp, reproduced in a book, and it said, Collection Beatrice Wood, Ojai, California. And at the time, I had no clue where Ojai was, but back then, in the 70s, some of you will remember, the way you found out a phone number was by calling directory assistance. Remember, it was 411. That still exists, but no one uses it. There's an internet now, so that doesn't happen. But I called, and I remember I got an operator, and I called it OJ, California. How do you pronounce O-J-A-I? And she laughed and corrected me and said it's Ojai. And she gave me a number, and I called it. But because I had done the math, I figured this person I'm calling, maybe it's Beatrice Wood, but maybe, I don't know, somebody else named Beatrice Wood, because it couldn't be that she was alive. If she was alive at all, she'd have to be I thought she'd be ancient. And anyway, this woman answered the phone, and it was a very youthful voice, and I can remember like it was yesterday. I said, could I speak to Beatrice Wood? And she said, I am Beatrice Wood. And I said, and I thought in confusion said, then I must want to speak to your daughter. And she said, my daughter? My daughter? I don't have any daughters. I said, then your mother? And she goes, my mother died in 1924. Who the hell are you? And that's how it began. Because I couldn't believe she was so vital and vibrant. And I tell everyone that I got on a plane the next day. The truth is, it took me about a week, but I did go right out to see her. And I met her on August 11th, 1976. And the reason I know the date is because you can consult her diaries. And she wrote it in her diary the day that I arrived. And it was an amazing experience to meet this woman. I can just tell you that, by the way, she's seated on the back of a bull there, you can see, with Duchamp and Picabia behind her. And I just wanted to know, who is this woman, and why does she have a Duchamp drawing? By the time I arrived, by the way, she had sold a drawing, because it was shown in 1973 in the Duchamp exhibition, and the next year she had sold it because she wanted to build a house. She was on McAndrews Road and wanted to build a house up in the Upper Ojai, and she did and needed the money to do it, so she had by then already sold the drawing. But anyway, when I first met her, she looked something like you see her on the left. And for those of you who have met her, and I know several of you here have, you remember that she was very short and she wore always an Indian sari. And when she came out of her house to greet me, because she heard my car coming up the driveway, I saw her walking toward me, and I have to tell you, she was standing between cacti, so I thought she looked like a garden gnome. Short thing. And I didn't know what to make of her. I'd walk up to her, but the minute she started talking to me, it was like I knew her forever. It was an amazing experience, because also somebody who had met her knows that she flirted with every single man who walked into that house. That was just her MO. And it was a wonderful, actually it was a great experience. And even though there was a good 50 years between us, I was quite flattered by this attention she was giving me, it seemed. And when we sat down and I conducted the interview, she just kept looking up at me, batting her eyelashes, and telling me stories. And I had the impression that she was telling them to me for the very first time, which of course she wasn't. She had already written them up in her autobiography, but you know, it was nice to have that kind of an experience with her. By the way, when we sat down, I was doing a real formal interview. I brought a tape recorder and everything, and she started to ask me questions, which I didn't expect. At first I tried to ignore them and went back to my questions. And then at one point, she started to tell me about the boyfriends in her life. Well, this was getting interesting, because I was waiting for Duchamp. I wanted to find out what was it like. And as she's telling me, she said, well, look, I can't tell you about Duchamp yet. I have to tell you first about Roché. I met him first. And she told me about Roché, and within 10 minutes, she told me that she had lost her virginity to this guy. I don't know who he is, but then she told me about Duchamp. Then she said she met a stage director in Montreal and married him, and I'm writing this down, and she was going so rapid fire that I couldn't keep up with her. So I asked the worst question you can ask anyone. I said, have you been intimate with that many men? And what a dumb question. And I will never forget, she turned to me and said, shut the tape recorder off. And I thought, uh-oh, that's it, I'm done. I just asked a stupid question and she's going to punish me. She said, no, you can put it back on, but I want to ask you a question. So I shut off the tape recorder and she said, okay, how many women have you slept with? And I said, I'm not doing this. I said, you can't do that. She said, well, we're not going on with the interview. I'm asking you. And it was a rather interesting thing, because, you know, that in the end, that's what history is. You can get all the facts you want, but if you know what people were doing in bed, it's the real nitty-gritty of history. It's what, you know, and I wanted to know that from her, but she was asking me it because I was young. I had just lived through the late 60s, and she wanted to know if that sexual revolution she heard about was really true, and she just wanted to know. And she said, give me a number. And I said, I can't give you a number. I've never done that. I never asked. You don't keep score. That's not what you do. And she said, no, but then you go home and you figure it out, and then you let me know. But the very fact that she was asking the question of me changed everything. It changed my whole attitude about her. She was no longer this repository that I'd come just to get information out of. She really wanted to know something about me. And that was ultimately the birth of a real friendship. She started to show me different things that first day, including photographs, and one of which was this one right here that ended up on the cover of her autobiography. And I remember looking at it, and I mentioned this yesterday, that some docents will remember. I said to her, wow, you were really beautiful. And she goes, were? And I said, okay, well, I'm sorry. I said, I don't really know you well enough to say that you're beautiful now. And she said, oh, that's a good answer. It was so, we went on. Anyway, that very first day, she showed me her diaries, and I couldn't believe it, because here I'm doing research on these people who were living in New York during the teens, and she seemed to have everything. Not only these personal reminiscences, but diaries that could back it up with actual dates when she met these people. In fact, I opened it. It's a 3-line diary. I don't know. She always called it a 3-line diary. It has 3 lines, but it has spaces for 4 lines of entries. And I don't know if you've ever seen these. At first, I couldn't read them. They go, you see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it's that September 26th, and then September 27th. So when you enter the next year, you see she changes year, you're able to see what you did the previous year, and the year before that, and the year before that, all the way down. And it was a fascinating thing to have discovered, because I have it open to the entry where she meets Marcel Duchamp for the first time. I don't know if I could actually find it here, because she misspells his name. Where is it? It should be 96 right there. Yeah. Oh yeah, she went to the hospital to visit the Frenchman Edgar Varese. He's the famous avant-garde musician. He was hit by a taxi cab in New York and broke his leg. And he spoke only French. And since she had worked in the French theater and spoke French, they asked if she could just go visit him. And Marcel Duchamp happened to be there, and she misspells his name as Marcelle. You'll see there, giving it a feminine gender, which I always say that he probably would not have minded at all, inventing the female pseudonym and identity later on. Anyway, she also showed me her photo albums. It was startling to see these pictures because they were the very people that I wanted to know about, and she was really close friends with most of them. Through Duchamp, because he lived in an apartment on West 67th Street above these collectors, Walter and Louise Arensberg, and she became intimate acquaintances of the Arensbergs and followed them out here to California. You can see pictures of that she took with her little brownie camera on the right side of the interior of the apartment, and then on the left page, the house that they lived in Hollywood. So all of these things were astonishing, but she had one more thing to show me. Imagine what it would be like if you put yourself in the same position. This woman seems to have this whole idea for a book, but with all of the bases to back it up, all the research, all in one place. And then she said that we had done about 2 hours of interviewing, and she said that she had to, every afternoon she went for a rest, and if I would like, she would show me these drawings that she did. Now I knew she had made one drawing, the one for the Independence exhibition, but I didn't know to what extent she was still drawing, or whether and how many she made in the teens. So she said, there's a box in my closet, you can help me pull it out and bring it into the living room, and then I'll go to sleep and you have a look at the drawing. So I did that. And there were mice who had lived in the bottom of the box, but they hadn't touched a single drawing. But they did go scurrying the minute I tried to grab the box. But anyway, I started to look at the drawings, and the first drawing I pulled out of the box was the one you see on the right. I don't know if you can see the inscription at the bottom. It says, Lee de Marcel, 630, après Webster Hall. So it's the bed of Marcel Duchamp, after Webster Hall, and at the top you can see the date of the 27th of May, 1917. Well, I pulled that drawing out, and I was absolutely certain it was a fake, which was a ridiculous conclusion to come to, but I had been somewhat preconditioned to thinking this, because I took a course in New York on Kandinsky with Rose Carol Washington Long, a well-known authority and scholar on Kandinsky, and she had just revealed to us that Kandinsky's famous 1910 abstract watercolor that's in the Guggenheim Museum was backdated by Kandinsky. It was actually made in 1922, but he wanted everyone to think he was the first abstract artist, so he backdated the drawing to 3 years before he made his first abstraction. So I thought, well then, all artists are liars, and this woman's one of them. And you see the spontaneous brush here. It looked like something from the abstract expressionist period. And I thought, okay, this woman's just, I don't know her at all, so she's got to be lying. And the next day I go to the Francis Bacon Library. Now that's a library that used to be in the Claremont colleges in California, but which has since closed, and now all of the papers have been given to the Huntington Library. But it was a library set up by Walter Arensberg, the collector who I referred to earlier, because he believed the old thing that you've probably heard before, that all of the great plays by Shakespeare were actually written by Francis Bacon. And he spent his entire life trying to prove that. He was a wealthy man, so he could do whatever he wanted with his money, and he certainly did nothing but that, and took it very seriously. At any rate, in the Francis Bacon Library, the director then at the time, Elizabeth Wrigley, showed me a little parcel of papers that Walter Arensberg had kept, labeled Beatrice Wood, and inside were about 40 drawings. And one of the drawings was on a calendar page of 1917. So I knew that that's not possible. She couldn't have made a drawing. If you wanted to fake a drawing, then you've got to go find the calendar of 1917. I knew it was real. And the next day I went right back up to Ojai because I couldn't believe that these were real. And all of a sudden took a great interest in her drawing. So now this woman has provided me not only with the diaries, with the photographs, with her personal reminiscences, but now with visual illustrations that documented events that took place moments after they occurred. That drawing on the right is when 5 people, you can see their names up there, Mina Loy, Charles Dieman, Eileen Dressler, Marcel, and Beatrice all packed into his bed after the famous ball at Webster Hall and slept together all one night, which she recounted in her autobiography, and beautifully in her autobiography at that. By the way, I keep mentioning her autobiography, and I encourage all of you to buy it whenever you can. They had copies in the bookstore here, but they ran out, so just buy them on Amazon. They'll get them back. You can buy them also at the Beatrice Wood Foundation in Ojai, but you can pick them up online for $20. So, and I urge and encourage all of you to read it because it's a beautifully written book. And every time I read it or reread parts of it, it's almost like she's standing in the room because it's like talkative and just like she was. Now, even if you came to my lecture 3 years ago in Santa Monica, you've not seen these images, and I put them up because I just recently discovered them. I was asked by the Santa Monica Museum to edit Beatrice's diaries, and my wife and I sat down and did that. It took nearly a year because you can only imagine. She received her first diary from her father in 1915, and from 1915 till the time she died at 105, she kept the diary every day. Would almost hardly end. So it's massive, absolutely massive. And before she died, she spent about 5 years transcribing the diary. But even with the transcriptions, it's very difficult to read because she was not a good speller, and you can't. It's murderous trying to look things up in there. But in the 1915 diary, shortly after she gets it from her father, she writes that she saw Jerome Myers and he made sketches of her. Now, Jerome Myers, I don't know if that name means anything to anyone here, he was one of the principal organizers of the famous Armory Show of 1913. Beatrice could not have seen that show. She was still in Europe at the time. But he was a well-known artist, and the fact that he made sketches of her meant that she was probably a prominent individual at the time. That's almost the only people he was making sketches of. And on the internet, just Googling Jerome Myers and Beatrice Wood, this thing popped up. And it doesn't exist. I mean, the drawing itself no longer exists anywhere that I know of, but somebody had it in their archives, and you pay $15 and they send it to you. So this is how I have that illustration on the right. The photograph on the left, I actually reproduced in my book on New York Dada, but did not know, and because it's not marked on the back, that it was a photograph taken by Jesse Tarbox Beals, who was a pretty well-known photographer in New York. So Beatrice was being photographed by some of the real elite and drawn by them because she was actually fairly well-known. If you look up her history, and you can do this at Lincoln Center and see all the plays she was nearly in 60 plays in a 3-year period because they were French-speaking parts that she had. And the Comédie Française would change constantly its production. So she was quite active. Her parents were not encouraging that she become an actress. It was the only worst thing you could become as an artist, because at least an actress made some money, an artist made nothing. And she lived an extremely oppressed existence. I didn't believe her when she first told me this because she was wealthy. She grew up in a wealthy family in San Francisco. When the earthquake happened, they moved to New York City. Her father was a real estate developer. They lived in a brownstone. They had a lot of money compared to most people. But she kept complaining about her mother. I mean, the whole time I knew her, she complained about her mother and her rich aunt. And that is the rich aunt who actually left her a trust fund and made it possible for her really to live the life of an artist. But they were extremely oppressive. And I think I didn't understand it when she first told me. But I sort of know now. What I didn't understand at the time is she told me that her mother's maiden name was Rosencrantz. So she was Jewish, but I didn't ask her about that, and never in the 22 years that I knew her did we even talk about it. But I had an Italian mother, and I can tell you that was rough. So they say Jewish mothers are worse, so I don't know. But she did complain about her, and she in fact made a drawing that I have in New York where she contemplated seriously committing suicide, jumping off a bridge because it was more than she could possibly handle. She was doing everything in her power to get away from these people that she thought was stifling her existence, and she knew that being an artist would be the conduit that would get her out of there. And when she met Duchamp at Varèse's bedside, life changed. I mean, definitively for her and almost for the rest of her life. On that first occasion in the meeting, that she had met, actually she had gone to see Varese on September 20th, and she recounts that event in her autobiography. She didn't meet Marcel Duchamp until I think the 27th of September, when she went back to visit him again because he was still in the hospital. But on the first occasion, she said a fly flew into her mouth when she was talking to him. And she was such a prim and proper, well-brought-up woman, she said, that she just swallowed it. And she talks about that in the autobiography. So that gives you an idea of how deep into the Victorian past this woman lived. Duchamp really, of course, changed her life because he invited her to become an artist. When she was at the hospital with Varese, she said, look, anybody can do modern art, it's all junk. And he said, well, then you try. He said, if you think it's that easy, you can try. He invited her over to his studio and said, look, whenever I'm not there, I'll give you even a key. You can come in and you can get away from your mother all you want and just draw here. And then when I come back, I'll look at what drawings you made. And she actually did that. This is his studio on the right. It looks like a bit of a mess from this view because you can see the bicycle wheel that she saw. And by the way, when she came into the studio, she said in her autobiography that she noticed the bicycle wheel and asked what it was. And he dismissed it completely. He just said, don't even worry about that. Don't think about it. It's just something I made and you don't have... Because he didn't want to even himself call it a work of art. He knew it was, but he was smart enough not to try to defend it. And that maybe in the end ultimately is Duchamp's real genius. He knew better than to... Because look, if you think about it, an artist is the last person you want to hear from trying to defend his work. It's like Leo Steinberg made a very famous statement that's been quoted often, that if you want to know something about a work of art, you go to the horse's mouth. In other words, you go to the artist. But then he always cautioned you, remember, the artist is the one who's trying to sell the horse. So you take whatever they have to say with a grain of salt. And anyway, he was smart enough to just, and besides, that wasn't their relationship about the art world. He just wanted to see what kind of drawings she could make. And she did exactly that. He would come home in the evening and say, some of these drawings are good, some are bad, and he would help her select them, those and chart the path of her, the direction she would take. There's another view of the studio on the left-hand side, and on the right is one of Beatrice's drawings where she says she is waiting for Marcel. You see at 7:45 p.m. She's waiting for him to return. She's lying on his Murphy bed and counting the minutes, as you can see all the way across the page. This is one of the drawings that's now in the Philadelphia Museum. These are close-ups of the photographs you saw on the album earlier. In the middle of the Arensberg studio was a large shaker table that folded up and became a chair. You can see paintings by Picabia in the background, and right over the mantelpiece is, and it's a poor photograph, but above the mantelpiece, above those African things on there, is Henri Matisse's painting of Madame Landesberg, and that is the painting that Beatrice saw and converted her to modernism. She said she was just looking at it, and it was almost as though the painting spoke to her and told her, you can do this. And she said she was mesmerized. She couldn't even move when she was looking at that painting. It was an odd picture to pick, and I think I might know the reason for it. If you look at many of Matisse's paintings, he intentionally left parts of them unfinished. And that whole concept of the non finito goes all the way back, of course, to Michelangelo. But when a modern artist does it, it makes that painting accessible, especially to other artists, because they're in their studio making works that are half finished anyway. So then they get this privileged view of a great painter, like mid-stride, as if the painting is still going on. And that might have been one of the reasons. This photograph on the right is Louise Arensberg seated on a sofa at the house, and she was very close to Beatrice. In fact, I also mentioned this yesterday, that at one point Walter Arensberg hit on her. Beatrice wanted to go out with her, and Beatrice said, "Are you crazy? You're my best friend's husband. You can't do this. This is ridiculous." And she rebuffed him, and he went back and told Louise, and that solidified their friendship for life. They were very close friends because everybody was jumping in and out of bed with everyone. We know, in fact, this is rather interesting. Beatrice said that whenever the name Roché came up in conversation, in the years that she spent with the Arensbergs in Hollywood, everything went silent. The name Roché couldn't be mentioned. And Beatrice said she never understood why. And actually, before she died, I was able to tell her exactly why. She was unaware of the fact that Roché, the man to whom she lost her virginity, for 3 years was having a secret affair with Louise Arensberg. And I found this out in his papers. So you can, and the Arensbergs, when they finally did go to California permanently, that was really the reason. Because Walter Arensberg had had an affair, we know one for sure, with Isadora Duncan. But she couldn't have affairs. It was a classic double standard. He could have them, but she couldn't. But when he found out she did, that was it. And by the way, she was the money in the family, the real money, the serious money in the family. So, you know, he went to California immediately. Anyway, I became fascinated by these evenings at the Arensbergs because, you know, this was the 70s. This was a time I was in school. Everybody went from one party to the other. But this was the party I really wanted to attend, but I couldn't. It happened 50 years earlier, so Beatrice was there, however, so I interviewed her at length about this. I researched every individual who was part of the group, and then I decided to take it to the next level and visualize it. I hired an artist named Andre Raffray, and he painted that picture for me on the right, which recreated those evenings at the Arensbergs, because that had to be one of the most exciting places you could ever go. If you knew the Arensbergs, you could show up at their apartment. And here's the thing, they didn't even have to be there. The maid would let you in, just sit down, she'd give you something to eat, and a lot of artists went there and stuffed their pockets for hungrier days to come, but it was crowded every single evening. And they continued, the Arensbergs would sometimes go out to dinner, go to the theater, and come back home and join the party, and stay with it till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. This went on through the whole war years, and up until around 1919, when they started to leave. Something like that couldn't exist today. I mean, I can only imagine it, who would take advantage of that kind of situation today. But it was, and it wasn't like the real stuffy salons that Gertrude Stein had, where you had to be invited, formally invited, and everything was formal. This was really completely informal. You could sit down, talk to anyone. They played chess in one corner. You can see I've got Picabia playing chess with Roché here in the foreground. Or you could play a musical instrument, and I have Beatrice in the lower left-hand corner in the chair, because almost like a signature, because she's the one who made this parties come alive, at least in my mind. Here's a photograph of Henri-Pierre Roché. He had to be one of the most interesting people to walk this planet, at least insofar as women were concerned. He wasn't all that strikingly attractive, but this guy could get a girl to take her clothes off in 20 minutes. I don't know what he did, and I have no idea what charm he had, but he certainly practiced it on a lot of people. In fact, his diaries, which are at the University of Texas at Austin, are absolutely fascinating because he wrote in code at the bottom exactly what he did. It's you don't want to know in a lot of cases. But the code has been cracked, and we know exactly what he did each time. And well, that was something. And you know, he is the man who, late in life, wrote Jules et Jim, the Jules and Jim, the famous, you know, the story of the love triangle that Jean Moreau starred in, that great film. He also wrote the Two English Girls, another film. Both of them were made into films by Francois Truffaut, who discovered his writings in a little bookstore on the Seine, and really made this man a very famous writer, but only at the very end of his life. He was in his 70s when he wrote these things, so he became famous only at the end. Anyhow, there is one occasion where I can document where he woke up in the morning with Eileen Dressler, that friend of Beatrice's, who was in the bed with Duchamp. Later that afternoon, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he brings Louise Arensberg out on the Palisades, and with the sight of New Jersey, they make love in the park. I don't know how you could, back in New York, it must have been more thinly populated than it is now. There's not a park where that's happening that I know of. Anyway, and then he goes back at night and spends the night with Beatrice, so that's quite an accomplishment. Anyway, Beatrice would go nightly to the Arensbergs, and on one occasion, a very early occasion, right after she gets introduced to them, she shows up one evening, and Elmer Ernest Southard is there. He's the man that you see on the left, a Boston psychiatrist who went to Harvard with Walter, and he was the earliest exponent of Freud, and according to Beatrice, they just talked Freud constantly, and he loved if Beatrice could recall her dreams from the previous night. and he would have her stand in front of the crowd and recall her dreams, and that's what this drawing on the right says, Beatrice recalling her dreams at the Arensbergs. Like that kind of sound bubble is one of the stories she relates. Of the drawings that Beatrice produced with Duchamp at the time in his studio, you have this one here, which is it appeared in Rogue magazine, a magazine that Walter Arensberg had financed, and it's called, as you can see at the bottom, Marriage of a Friend. I asked her about this drawing, and like other questions that I asked her, whenever I got very specific, she didn't recall, because she did say that the red represented the friend, not the friend that she was, her friend was Elizabeth Hapgood, who married this man who was actually friends with Theodore Roosevelt and also with Wilson. So he was a diplomat and a much older man. And she said that that kind of red spiral coming down, grabbing the plant and kind of choking it could be what she meant, but she didn't really remember. It could be that this much younger friend of hers was marrying this older man, and that's what she was trying to illustrate in the drawing, but she no longer recalled. This is a drawing on the right called Soiree, where you can see she's drawn that very scene that you see in the slide, the image on the left, the overstuffed chair in the very far left corner and the couch right behind it. They both appear here in the drawing, where Picabia and Duchamp are playing chess together with Glaise further down on the couch. Now, this drawing I own very proudly, because every time I went to visit Beatrice, she would always worry that I wouldn't come back, so she always wanted to give me a gift. And I had already shown her drawings in New York and knew about the existence of this drawing because I knew a photograph in her albums, but she said she had long ago lost touch with it, she didn't know what happened to it. And then suddenly a woman appeared at her doorstep in Ojai and said that she had purchased a drawing from Beatrice 40 years before for $5, and would she like it back for $5? So Beatrice gave her $5, and then she got the drawing back, and I have it now. Anyway, this is one of the drawings that's in the collection of the well, it was in the collection of the Francis Bacon Library, but it's now in the Philadelphia Museum. The self-portrait that you see on the left. I also asked her about this, and she said she didn't have a clue what she was trying to say, except that if it's supposed to be a picture of her, that deep, sharp line that goes jagged through the middle of it is her anxiety. Anxiety, and she thinks it could be traced back to the oppression she felt from her mother. Also, that little tassel on the top of her head is maybe what you see in the upper right corner of the drawing. I don't know. Anyway, the real climax of activities here in New York in the teens was the organization of an exhibition put on by a society called the Society of Independent Artists, which Beatrice was on the board of, Duchamp was, the Arensbergs were, and all of their friends. The idea of the exhibition was to have a show in New York where anybody who presented their little nominal entry fee, $5, could show 2 works in the annual exhibition. This exhibition, the Society of Independent Artists, went on for another 30 years. And it was a very important organization at the time because it was about democracy in the arts. And remember that Wilson ran for president in 1916, he did the first time, but he ran on the second time saying that he kept us out of war. And then when we went into war, we said that we were trying to defend American shores for democracy. And that's exactly what these people were doing in the art world, and as coincidence would have it, we actually declared war on Germany 2 days after the independence opened. So it was a kind of common spirit, we try to get everyone their just due and everyone could be seen. But unfortunately for this first exhibition, everybody handed in their $5, and I mean everybody. There were 2,000 artists. It was the single largest exhibition ever held in New York history. And I'm not sure, because everybody could present 2, so 4,000 works. They had to hire the Grand Central Palace, one of the biggest convention centers in New York. That's been destroyed now, but it was just north of Grand Central. And you can see they set up temporary partitions and put everything in alphabetical order. You can see the letter C there in the foreground of the exhibition. Now, that's just another shot of the exhibition. And these are, I'm going to skip through these because they're publications that Beatrice worked on that were part of the exhibition. But I'm showing you here the 2 works that she submitted to the 1917 Independence Exhibition. The one on the left, called Nightmare, in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum. And the one on the right, you can see the title. It's hard to read there, I guess, but it's a ceramic version of what she showed, which was originally oil on canvas, which depicted a nude woman coming out of her bath, and when she tried to paint a bar of soap in what she called a tactical position, Duchamp said, no, don't do that. Let's go out and get a good bar of soap and buy it and stick it on the canvas. So he helped her with nails to fix it to the surface of the canvas. And when she wrote the title on the corner, she wrote Un peu d'eau dans du savon. She meant to write Un peu du savon dans l'eau. It's supposed to be a little water and some soap, not a little soap and some water. But anyway, she got it wrong, and Duchamp said, oh, no, leave it. That's perfect. Just, mistakes are meant to happen, and you just should let it go. She was like that. She embraced that completely, mistakes like that. And I love that about her, because I'm the exact opposite. I want everything to be right to the extent you can control things and make them correct. But she didn't care about that, even when she spoke. And I can't resist but to repeat this little anecdote. I was sitting around once talking to her one evening about feminism, and she said to me, look, I don't know what it is about feminists. All they want is just another organism. What? And I said, Beatrice, you mean orgasm? And she said, oh, but you know what I meant. And she would dismiss it like that. It would be like, and I also love to follow this up with her ceramics. When she makes mistakes in her ceramics, she doesn't mind that they're there. I was with her. I actually came out for 1 week, and we did a firing in the kiln. She taught me about ceramics. I loved that experience. And one of the vessels had a kind of crooked handle, and she could have corrected this before she put it in the kiln. And I said, look, the handle on that is crooked. Don't you want to fix it? She said, yeah, but it's a handle. You can still pick it up, right? And I said, well, yeah, you can fix it too. And she said, no, you can still pick it up, because if it was serviceable, why fix it, And she actually made a wonderful comment to me that I don't think's ever been quoted in the literature on her. Actually, maybe I did quote it somewhere. She said that it's when the craft ends, art begins. It was a wonderful definition of art, in a way. And she might be right. It was a nice way to hear about that. Anyway, this is the drawing that she did for the Blind Man's Ball that I mentioned earlier, the stick figure thumbing its nose to the world. The Blind Man's Ball was held on May 25th. You remember that drawing I just showed earlier was dated May 27th. She went to their house and slept with Duchamp in bed that night, and it was the next day that she made the drawing. It was just another sketch. At the Independence exhibition, she danced a Russian dance, and she said that Joseph Stella tried to defend her honor, which she didn't quite understand, because she said her honor had already left a couple of months before. Anyway, she said that's what happened. And that's a little sketch that she made in the evening up there in the upper left. And this sketch on the right, I actually just recently acquired and found in the papers of the Sunwise Turn bookshop. She worked in a bookshop in New York in 1919 that sold all the Dada periodicals. And the owner, apparently she had given this piece of paper to the owner, and it was preserved still in the files. And you can see that it is her Russian dance. You can see the hat she's wearing there in the center of the drawing. That's the Lit de Marcel that I showed earlier. And these are those publications. By the way, in the 1917 Independence exhibition, as you may already, some of you know, Duchamp submitted his famous urinal. And it was that controversy that Beatrice got very much involved in. And it was she, Beatrice, who wrote here on the upper right the very famous editorial called The Richard Muck Case. And they are her words when you see, as for plumbing, that is observed, the only works of art America has given are her plumbing and her bridges. That's quoted over and over and over again as if they were Duchamp's words, when in actual fact she wrote them. And on this copy of The Blind Man that she gave me, she signed it in the corner. You can see the little BW, so that wouldn't be confused in the future, but it still is. People still continue, because they don't have that issue, and I'm not around to correct them. But, they were words, in a way, that Duchamp would have approved of. He didn't know English well enough to write an editorial like that, so she wrote it for him. But he approved of all of the words, so maybe you could think of it as a joint venture. Now, I skipped quickly to these drawings because you can see they're the dates at the bottom of them. I decided to look for those dates in Beatrice's diary and in Roché's, because she called the one on the left, La Première Nuit. That's the first night she spent with Roché. So I thought I would discover in both of their diaries what really happened that first night. Well, in Beatrice's, there's nothing. She just mentioned that she met Roché. She doesn't say that. And she explained to me that the reason that nothing was in there is she always feared that her mother could open the diary and find what she was doing. But in fact, Roché was not so discreet. And that's all I'm going to tell you. You'd have to read that. That is his diary entry on the left. It's very hard to read it. Well, not only is it in French, but it's a real scribbled and contorted kind of handwriting. And the little codes you can see at the bottom. But anyway, I show that picture on the right. It's too bad the slide is not so good on the right, because she says 10 heures du matin. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, a full partir. She's got to get out of there. And what she's getting away from is that guy who you can barely see in the bed. That's Roché. And if you look at the top, there's the top of a brass bed, and the handle of the brass bed at the top. I think if you just look at that, flip the other way, it's a question mark. And I think she was quite worried about what she just did. I mean, this was her break. This was her way of getting away from her mother, but maybe this was going too far. And she worried about it, and she worried about it in a lot of different ways. As my wife discovered going through her diaries, she put little stars to mark the dates of her period so that she wouldn't accidentally get herself pregnant. She was terrified over that and made even some drawings to that effect that you can see in a few moments. She did this crazy drawing of Beatrice and her dozen children, which depicted the various members of the Arensberg clan. Some people we don't even know anymore, like this guy Cedes, who's in the middle. But she's labeled Pierre like 3 times. And the other people, we know the guy Reeves, who was an oil prospector who came to the Arensbergs on occasion, but Walter, there's Arthur Craven over there, and Madame de Cavia over here. Totor was a nickname that they affectionately called Duchamp, coming from the word victor, as a victor. This is a drawing that I regret having, well, I didn't sell it, Beatrice did, because when I first exposed her drawings at the Philadelphia Museum, later we arranged for commercial exhibitions. And whenever something sold, the proceeds went directly to Beatrice, but I always tried to figure out who owned the drawing, so someday I could find them in the future. I actually found who owns this drawing, but it's a beautiful image, which is, I am sure, inspired by the convention of 1916 when Roosevelt ran again for president, because she writes the word convention right under the head here, but it also says, Dieu protège les amants, God protect the lovers. And she was very much in love not only with Roché, but she was starting to fall in love with Duchamp, and she confessed publicly on stage once that she was in love with both men, but she insisted not at the same time. She was not the heroine in Jules and Jim. She wasn't the woman between 2 men. It was actually someone that Roché met later in Germany. But she, until the end of her life, was identified as this woman in Jules and Jim, and she never was. This is just another drawing that she made with this kind of worry that she had, where she says, my God, give me courage in the middle and protect this infant who sleeps within me. That never happened, and she never had children, and I asked her if she ever wanted ever to have them, and she said, good God, no, because of my mother. I know what my mother was like, and I might have done the same thing to a child. I would never have done that. So it was a good attitude to have. And, anyway, I said that she married this stage manager in Montreal, and that's him right there in that photograph on the left. She never would tell me his name. And the reason she didn't is because she knew he had children later, and well, not later, actually what happened, it's worse than that. Oh, that's the water. But I'll tell you just what happened. She meets this man, and she marries him, and they never had any physical relations, which she was very suspicious of, and she should have been. He was already married and had, I think, 4 children in Europe. Her parents found this out and had the marriage annulled, but not in time, because he had already seen her as a target. He not only took as much money as he could get from her, but he met the Arensbergs and he borrowed from them $20,000. And you know how much money that was in 1919? That's an ocean of money. And Beatrice absolutely vowed that she would pay it back. And she said it took her over 20 years, but she insisted on paying it back. They said that they didn't need the money, but she would always come over to their house and every time come with a check, trying desperately to pay that money back. Anyway, there's Beatrice on the right, looking in total agony, and it was a drawing made at that very moment when the breakup with them occurred. There's the Arensbergs in their Hollywood home, and I showed you that already, so that's another shot of the Hollywood home, and she just started doing the same thing she did in the New York years, depicting all the people, in this case a visit from Duchamp to the Arensberg home. And these, I have to skip a few because I know what the time is here. This is a drawing made in 1932, and it's one of the drawings in my gift to the museum. It isn't shown here because of what they thought was light fading, but I know is a transfer of colored construction paper, which can be repaired. But anyway, this drawing is Beatrice seeing herself like she always wanted to draw. Whenever you talked to her, she said the person she idolized as an artist more than all others combined was Maxfield Parrish. First, for a moment, I forgot his name. Maxfield Parrish. And in a way, I guess this is what she's trying to do here. But she sees herself as a kind of Hollywood starlet. And I show her next to, now I've forgotten her name. Is it Vivian? Oh, Hedy Lamarr. And you know what Hedy Lamarr, what she's famous for? She was famous for a film right around the same period where she, on the screen, was the first woman to fake an orgasm. That's what she was famous for. So one can see this kind of why she might have taken an interest. Well, I think fake. I don't know. Anyway, but okay. This is a photo album on the upper left that Beatrice compiled because when the Arensbergs, Walter Arensberg loved looking at her drawing and deciding which ones were good or bad. So did Roché, so did Duchamp, but she was detached. And so far away from them, living in Hollywood, that she made this album. She made 3 sets of the album and mailed them off to each one of the 3 people to get their feedback about what they thought of her new drawings. And this last one was owned by Henri-Pierre Roché, and when he died, his widow mailed it back to Beatrice, which is the reason I have it. But you can see she puts a painting in the lower left corner. Whenever you see these forlorn figures, they're always Beatrice herself. This I talked about yesterday, but you know, of course, what happened after this. She stopped drawing altogether when she discovered ceramics. And that was in 1933. And in 1933, even though Beatrice always lied about her age, she was already 40 years old. And she changed her life completely and became, in the end, one of the best known people in the California arts and crafts movement of the second half of the century. She really did. In part because she pioneered this kind of luster glaze. A couple of people were using it, but not quite the way she did. It was a radiant glaze that jumped off the vessel. And I often think that Beatrice is actually still involved with the idea of self-portraits. Because, you know, when you describe a vessel, anyone describes it, the top of it is called the neck. The part where the handles are is always called the shoulder. This is the main body of the vase. The bottom is called the foot. So it's got these anthropomorphic readings to begin with. And then when she puts all this glitz on the surface, that's what she was doing. She wore saris that were iridescent and radiant. She had beautiful jewelry. So in a way, she became ultimately what she was making, or she made herself in a way. The other thing that I mentioned yesterday is when she was taken ill at the age of 102, a doctor came in and asked me, "Why is your friend still smoking?" And I said, "Well, she never smoked. What are you talking about?" And he puts x-rays up on the screen. He said, "Look at her lungs. They were completely coated. They were coated with glaze." She was sort of building ceramics in the middle of her body at the same time. And I remember saying to the doctor, "Oh, I'll tell her to stop." And he said, "What do you mean stop? She's 102. Why would you tell her that?" Anyway, Beatrice, on her 90th birthday, I was with her, and she did 3 things on that day that I will never forget. The first was, all 3 unexpected to me. When I got up in the morning and met her for breakfast, she said, "Look, we're going downtown, we're going into Ojai, and I just have to do something." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And she said, "Well, you'll see. Be patient, you'll see what it is." So we get in the car, and you know, she was kind of short, so I had to put pillows under her and prop her up. And she drives all the way down right to the police station. And what are you doing, Beatrice? So we watched it come on, and I go into the police station. There's a clerk at the desk, not even a police officer. She pulls out her license and puts it on the counter. And he says, what are you doing? She said, I'm going to surrender my license. I don't believe old people should drive. And then she turned to me and said, drive me home. And that really happened. And she never drove again. And the other thing she did is on her 90th birthday, she decided to never lie again about her age. She always lied about her age. Whenever someone wrote her a letter and said, what year were you born in? She would always respond, 1903. I'm sorry. She would always respond 1703. And the person who was a recipient would say, well, of course she wasn't born in 1703. She must have meant 1903. So she would make the recipient make the mistake. And they would put down she was born in 1903. And about 10 books have her date as born. She was born in 1893. She gave herself 10 years for that little trick. Quite good, I thought. Anyway, I'm only going to skip here to the end. These are different. I brought her to New York and actually showed her the apartment of Walter Arensberg. That's a photograph taken in 1978, probably. I'm there in the foreground with Beatrice and some of my fellow students in Duchamp's apartment. She loved going there because she could remember right where the bed was, right where he kept chocolates on the ledge in the wintertime. Anyway, the last book that I did on Beatrice was really the one that was the exhibition here held at Santa Monica. And the reason I actually gave these drawings to this institution was because that was the last exhibition Beatrice saw, and she absolutely loved it. It was held first in New York City and didn't look very good there because they wouldn't let me properly, they weren't funded to give me new bases and vitrines, so I had to use those that already existed. So it didn't look anywhere near as good as it did here. And I have to say that you go up to the exhibition that's up there, everything is done at a very high professional level in this museum. And it was certainly on that day. When she saw the exhibition, she was overwhelmed by it and loved it. And I was very happy to be able to do it because I gave her this book, and there's a photograph on the flyleaf you can see in the upper right where I'm showing her the galleys for this book. The book had actually appeared, and when I handed it to her for the first time, she said, now, when she gets to heaven, she finally has something she can show to St. Peter. That was on the very last day that I spent with Beatrice. These photographs were taken, the ones that you see on the left. They were arranged by her assistant at the time, Nancy Martinez, who's here tonight and actually sent me this photograph that you see on the left, where Beatrice is in the lower left corner, and right next to her is James Cameron, the director of Titanic. Now, you've probably all heard that Beatrice has this kind of connection with Titanic, but it gets so completely confused. In fact, on that last day when I was with her, I must have taken 3 phone calls from people who were asking if they could speak to the last survivor of the Titanic. Beatrice was not on the Titanic. What happened is that James Cameron came, he was trying to, I don't know if you remember the movie. I mean, you probably remember that it was the love affair between this wealthy girl and the guy in the third-class cabin, right? It was an artist who does that famous drawing of her. And then in order to make the story credible, she had to grow up and be this older woman who would be around 100 years old. So in order to get an insight of what a 100-year-old would be like, James Cameron said, he told me this on that last day, that he went out to nursing homes around the LA area to find somebody who was 100 years old. And he said it was terrible. They were all like catatonic, and he thought this is going to be a mess. But then he mentioned that to Roddy McDowell, who some of you know lived in Ojai. And he told him, look, you've got to meet this woman. She's 102, and she's an absolute dynamo. And he went up to meet her, and he flipped out. He said that he ran back down to Ojai, rented a camera, went up, and if you see the movie Titanic, before this woman, Rose, comes on, she's in the back room throwing a pot. And those hands are Beatrice's in that movie. So she's part of the movie in that way. But she's not, and then because I found that all out during this last meeting, I asked him, did he hire Kate Winslet down there to play the part because she looked like Beatrice? And he said, absolutely. He actually asked Beatrice if she would like to star in the role that Gloria Stewart has. That's Gloria Stewart in the right-hand corner of that photograph on the left. But Beatrice said no. She couldn't do it because she's too old. She couldn't listen to the instructions. She said she's hard of hearing, it wouldn't happen. Even though she started her career as an actress, she wasn't going to end it that way. So on that day, James Cameron gave her a videotape, and she writes it in her diary. Back then, even a short time ago that this was, they had cassettes, and you couldn't fit all of Titanic on one cassette, so it was a 2-volume cassette. So he handed it to Beatrice and asked her to watch it. And when he left, she turned to me and said, "Is it sad?" And I said, "Sad? Yeah, it's sad. Everybody dies at the end." I said, "But watch the first half, because it's really pretty good." And she did. She watched that first half and enjoyed it. Interestingly enough, it was that night. The next day, she was taken ill. And 1 week later, exactly 1 week later, she died. Anyway, I spent nearly a year not being able to talk about her. But I always like to end with this photograph. That was taken on her 100th birthday. So, okay, I'm done. Thank you. If you have questions,
Time for a few questions, if anyone has any. I'm sure you do.
I didn't tell you everything.
Frances, what were the other two things that she did on her 90th birthday?
Oh yeah, good. I didn't get to that. Well, the second one I did say, she stopped lying about her age. But she did one thing that's remarkable, and I should have remembered it when I had the slide up there. She went into her studio and started throwing large-scale pots. She didn't ever do that before, because she somehow didn't have the courage, she said, to throw them. And they're huge. If you know them, it's very hard to throw. You have to be really strong to control the clay as it's spinning around on the wheel and still pull it off. And she did. She made about 20 of them. Huge, and those are really the most sought after and most desirable of her ceramics. Whenever they're sold, Garth Clark, who represented her for years, said that he sold one of them for over $100,000. He said this, but he didn't really. He told that to a reporter in the New York Times, but confessed to me, he got close to it, but he never really got over $100,000. So if you have a large-scale vessel by Beatrice, you're sitting on a good chunk of money. She said that that only she, in the end, could afford to eat on her home plates. But whenever you went to her house, that's what you ate on. It was great. Let me see. Yeah, those were the three things she did on her birthday. The other thing, I introduced her to an elderly man who was going out with one of my cousins who lives in L.A., and he was dying to say something to her. He was so anxious, he wouldn't tell me what it was. I said, okay, you can meet her. And he came up, he met her, I introduced them, they sat down at the table, and then he was ready for his question. He turned to her and he said, "Look, nothing gets better with age, does it?" And Beatrice, without missing a beat, turned to him and said, "Yes, it does. Fear of death." And I thought that was a great answer, and I think that's what happened on her 90th birthday. She became so liberated and free because every day was a gift, and she knew it. She knew it. From that point onward, she had to know it.
Do you play an active part in her studio today?
No, not with the studio. I seem to be the only one out there trying to buy her work at auction, though, because very few people seem to bid against me. But I have been trying to acquire her work. When she would always give me pieces, small pieces, but when it came to a larger piece that I thought she could sell, I always refused to take it. And so now I can afford to buy them. So on occasion I buy what there is out there. It depends, because people, when Beatrice was older, people were going up to her place just trying to make an investment. And that so totally irritated me that I thought, that this is not why you buy art. You can't, they're all figuring, oh, she's going to die. She's got to die. Shit, she's 100. She's got to go someday. Okay, I'm going to buy. I'll give you $5,000 for that drawing. Well, the drawing wasn't worth $5,000. That was the problem. And then, of course, after she died, they flooded the market trying to cash in on their investments. And I'm very happy they weren't able to sell them. I certainly wouldn't buy them, because that's not why you should buy art. I mean, it's the way I'm an art dealer. I'm supposed to buy it like that, and I can't even do it. So I don't want my clients to be doing that. Anyway, she in the end, made quite a bit of money from the sale of her ceramics. I'm very proud to say. Yes, but
Francis, did Duchamp come to Ojai to visit?
Oh yes, in 1963, during the time of the Pasadena exhibition, he came up to Ojai. There's a great photograph of him seated at the table with Beatrice, with his wife, Teenie, with R.P., with Walter Hopps, who was the director of the museum. R.P. was the person that Beatrice was really in love with, Ram Pravesh Singh. She met him in India, and I think on her second trip, or maybe her first trip in '61, and then he came to live with her in Ojai. But he was officially her studio manager. And they had a real tortured relationship, I have to say. But a very interesting one, I thought.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, is that person. What was his name again?
Ram Pravesh Singh. He died just after Beatrice did. He had to be 30 years her junior, but he did.
So he wasn't her caregiver, he was her lover, or he was
Well, I don't know, do you use the word lover when somebody's 70? I don't know.
Yes.
I guess. I don't know how, I don't know how you were asking that. That's what I should have said. Of course you use it.
I understand regarding RP that in the end she did not leave him very much, if anything at all. Is that true, or was it just falsely reported in the news?
She left in things, because I inherited the estate of her drawings, and because of the way taxes worked at that time, I had to give 300 or 400 of them back to the foundation. But I held on to those that depicted RP, and I mailed him about 50 of them after he died. I don't know, after she died, not of course after he died. But anyway, I don't know what happened financially. I know that she was living up on, the Happy Valley property, and it was the understanding that the home and all of her possessions and belongings would go to the school. So that's really what happened in the end. She loved that place, and she loved, well, some of you know about her relationship with Krishnamurti, that he lived on McAndrews Road across the street from her. She really came to California to be with him and follow him, though he probably didn't think she was the best to follow him, because he complained all the time about what she wore and makeup and jewelry and saris and all this that he didn't exactly condone. Anyway, that was the reason she was out here, really, in the end, because Krishnamurti moved out here.
One more question?
Yes?
In viewing the drawings, I see a lot of innuendo about relationships with women. Can you expound on that?
I was just asked about this. In the touching certain things, if you read the text and then you see the images, you think that she's had a relationship with Helen Freeman, the person that she went to Europe with, which this story is about. In fact, when I wrote about that for the first time for the exhibition at Oakland, I sent the manuscript to her ahead of time, and I just said that she had an intimate relationship with Helen Freeman, and she's never corrected anything I ever wrote, ever, but she asked me if I would take that word out. She said because people want her to have been a lesbian, but she really wasn't. She said she never had any physical relationship with a woman, though the strongest people in her life were 3 women, and Helen Freeman was one of them. Helen Freeman, the first day, I just got through telling Nancy this very story, but the first day that I met Beatrice, she mentioned Helen Freeman in passing. And I said, well, who's Helen Freeman? And she said, who's Helen Freeman? You're asking me who Helen Freeman? I said, yeah, I don't know who is she? And he said, she was the most famous person I ever knew, because she was in the theater and starred in Broadway in hundreds of productions. She was really famous. And she came out to California and tried Hollywood, and it didn't work because I guess her voice was high-pitched, like you hear a lot of stories. But she was a wonderful and very close friend of Beatrice's. Until she died, I remember, she told me this the first day, on Christmas Day 1960. She married a man named Coral, who was a famous writer of westerns and Hollywood westerns, but she remained really close to Beatrice all the way to the end. And I suppose the closest friend right after that is Rosalind Rajagopal, who was part of the Krishnamurti. That's a whole nother lecture, and I'm not the one to give it. So it's another. I said this yesterday, that the first time I I met Beatrice, I asked her, well, people would always be asking her why she lived so long, what is the secret of her longevity? And she, once I asked her, why does she, I kept saying, actually it was the second time I went out to see her. She was wearing the sari, and I decided, okay, I'll ask her what this is, because now I'm getting to know this woman, and I don't know anything about Krishnamurti, but I thought he was like some kind of guru or something, and she was worshiping him. I thought it was a religion. So I said, does the sari have anything to do with your religion? And she said, no, it's because I like chocolates and young men. And I said, I don't get it. And she said, oh, you silly boy, I'm fat under here. It was really what she said. I mean, I'll never forget it. Anyway, she did love chocolates, and that was incredible. I mean, she ate a bar of Hershey. Everybody brought her Godivas and stuff like that because they heard but she hated that stuff. She liked just plain old Hershey's, not even the dark kind that's supposed to have the antioxidants in it, but she liked the regular. Every single night she ate a bar of that chocolate, and she ate a cracker, Nancy will know this because we've seen her do it, slathered with butter and chopped up clove of garlic on the top of it. Every night. She said she would eat it at night because then she wouldn't have, the breath wouldn't be so bad all day. But she did do that. Now, one of those remedies must have worked. I also said this yesterday, the remedy ultimately that I think worked the most is she had this contraption that she had in her bedroom where she hung upside down. You know, you can buy them now that you just go back on, but it brought blood to her brain. She said she started doing that when she thought she felt dementia coming on. The first thing she did was subscribe to the New York Times crossword puzzle, and when she could solve it within an hour, she quit. Even the hard Saturday one she was able to do within an hour. I don't know how that's not easy. And then she hung upside down. I would even when she came to the New York one, she brought a portable contraption that I had to set up in her hotel room so she could hang upside down. She hung for 10 minutes a night. And I'm sure that brings enough blood to your brain to keep you going. And it sure did for her, because she was absolutely, totally alert. I don't think there was any form of dementia anywhere near this woman ever. She always told people she had the heart of a 32-year-old, and she must have, because that cat beat. And almost nothing could slow her down.
All right, well, thank you so much. Any other questions? No? All right,
Okay.
thank you so much.